She didn't trip, she didn't jump. In one brutal moment, hands meant to protect shoved her into a place no human should ever be, a lion enclosure. Steel fences, roaring silence, death only seconds away. The officers behind the barrier thought the worst part was about to begin. They were wrong, because instead of violence, something impossible happened. Something that exposed cruelty, power, and injustice in a way no courtroom ever could. What the alpha lion did next didn't just save a life, it changed everything. Comment and tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And subscribe for more powerful stories. Liana Brooks had always believed that visibility was a form of protection. As a community advocate, she spent her days documenting moments most people were taught to ignore, quiet abuses of power, small injustices that carried heavy consequences. She wasn't famous. She wasn't reckless. She was simply consistent, a phone in her hand, truth in her voice, and the belief that if enough light was shined on wrongdoing, change would eventually follow. That afternoon, Fairview Wildlife Reserve felt like one of the few places where tension shouldn't exist. Families moved between exhibits, children pressed their hands against glass, and the low hum of distant animal calls blended with laughter and camera shutters. Liana was there on her own time, taking a break from work, enjoying the rare calm, until she noticed the flashing lights near the entrance. A minor confrontation had drawn attention, an arrest that felt unnecessarily aggressive. Instinct took over. Liana lifted her phone and began recording, careful to keep her distance, careful to stay within her rights. She didn't shout, she didn't interfere. She simply documented. That was enough. By the time she turned away, the mood had shifted. The air felt tighter, heavier. 3 officers watched her with expressions that weren't about law or order but about control. Officer Crane stood slightly apart, his gaze fixed, unblinking. The argument that followed was brief, quiet, and edged with hostility, questions about why she was filming, warnings disguised as procedure. Liana tried to disengage. She stepped back, intending to leave the area altogether. But her path narrowed. The crowd thinned. The sounds of families and children faded behind steel fencing and restricted signs. With every step, the space around her felt less public, less safe. She didn't yet realize how deliberately she was being guided. Didn't notice how close she was to the edge of something far more dangerous than an argument. Behind her stood the lion enclosure, massive, sealed, and unforgiving. Ahead of her stood men who had already decided she'd gone too far. And in that uneasy stillness, long before anyone was pushed, the outcome had already begun to take shape. The moment Liana Brooks realized she wasn't being questioned anymore, but cornered, came too late. Her steps slowed as the space around her narrowed, the tall fencing of restricted areas replacing the open pathways of the reserve. The noise of families and visitors faded, swallowed by distance and steel. What remained was the sound of her own breathing, steady at first, then uneven. Officer Crane moved closer, not rushed, not aggressive in the obvious sense. It was the calm that made it dangerous, the kind of calm that comes when someone believes they hold all the power. He asked again why she was filming, his tone flat, rehearsed. Liana answered carefully, citing her rights, keeping her voice controlled. She'd done this before. She knew the rules. She knew the law, but the law wasn't what mattered here. One officer shifted behind her. Another blocked the path back toward the entrance. Liana felt it then, the unmistakable awareness that the situation was no longer about procedure. It was about punishment, about reminding her what happened when someone like her refused to look away. She glanced over her shoulder and froze. Just a few steps behind her stood the lion enclosure. Massive, silent, the kind of place where danger didn't need to announce itself. Heat radiated from the sand inside, and the tall barrier that separated humans from predators suddenly felt terrifyingly thin. "Let's move this conversation somewhere quieter," one of the officers said. Liana's instincts screamed. This wasn't quiet. This was isolated. She took a step sideways, trying to keep distance, trying to create space. Her phone was still in her hand, recording. That small red light became a threat. She saw it in their eyes, saw the shift, saw the smirk creep across Officer Crane's face as if an idea had fully formed. Then it happened. A sudden shove. Not enough to look dramatic, just enough to steal balance. Her foot slipped on the edge of the concrete. Time fractured. The sky spun, and before she could scream, the ground vanished beneath her. Liana fell. Her body hit the sand inside the enclosure with a force that knocked the air from her lungs. Pain shot through her ribs. Dust filled her mouth. For a second, she couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The world rang like it had been struck by a hammer. Above her, beyond the fence, she heard laughter. She pushed herself up on shaking arms, heart slamming against her chest, and that was when she felt it. The vibration, heavy, measured, alive. She looked up. Two lions stood several yards away. Massive, golden, still. Titan the Alpha stepped forward first. His presence alone seemed to bend the space around him. Nero followed slower, his eyes never leaving her. Their paws pressed into the sand with a weight that felt final. Predators doing what predators do when something unfamiliar enters their domain. From behind the fence, the officers watched, arms crossed, faces tight with satisfaction. One of them raised a phone. Liana scrambled backward, palms burning against the sand, every survival instinct screaming at her to run even though there was nowhere to go. The gate was too far, the walls too high, the lions too close. Her chest tightened. Fear constricted her throat. She whispered a prayer she hadn't said since childhood. Titan lowered his head, close enough now that she could see the scars in his mane, close enough to feel his breath. Every second stretched, fragile and thin. One wrong movement would end everything. Then something shifted. Titan stopped. Not just stopped, but turned his head, slowly, deliberately. His gaze locked past her through the fence, straight at the men who had pushed her. A low growl rolled from his chest. Not wild, not chaotic, controlled, directed. Nero hesitated, then mirrored Titan's stance, positioning himself closer to Liana's side. Confusion flickered across the officers' faces. This wasn't what they expected. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. Inside the enclosure, Liana realized something terrifying and unbelievable at the same time. The lions weren't closing in on her. They were closing ranks. The alarms went off all at once. A sharp, piercing wail cut through the air, echoing across the reserve as the enclosure sensors detected a human inside restricted space. The sound shattered the officer's confidence instantly. What had felt controlled only moments ago now spiraled beyond them. Visitors screamed in the distance. Footsteps thundered. Radios crackled with urgent voices racing toward the scene. Inside the enclosure, Liana Brooks pushed herself to her knees, her body trembling from pain and adrenaline. Every breath burned, but she forced herself to stay still. Titan stood directly in front of her now, massive, unmoving, deliberate. His body formed a living barrier between her and the fence. Officer Crane grabbed the railing, his knuckles white. His smirk vanished, replaced by panic. He shouted explanations that didn't quite make sense anymore, claims of trespassing, of accidents. But his voice cracked under the weight of the alarms and the growing crowd of rangers sprinting closer. Titan's gaze never left him. There was something unsettling in the lion's stare. Not rage, not hunger, recognition. As if he understood exactly where the threat came from. Liana felt the vibration before she heard it. A low, thunderous growl rolled from Titan's chest, deep enough to rattle the fence. Nero shifted behind her, positioning himself like a sentry, cutting off any angle of approach. The lions were no longer reacting. They were guarding. One of the officers muttered that they should get her out. Crane snapped back that it was too late. If she survived this, if anyone saw what really happened, everything would collapse. His eyes flicked to her hands. That was when Liana felt her phone beneath her thigh. It was still intact. Slowly, carefully, she reached for it, every movement measured, every breath shallow. Titan's ears twitched. His eyes flicked to her hand, then back to the fence. He didn't move. Didn't warn her. He held his ground. She pressed record. The moment the red light appeared, Crane saw it. He lunged toward the fence, shouting for her to stop, demanding she drop the phone. His voice was sharp, desperate, unraveling. The rangers skidded to a halt, stunned by the sight before them. A woman alive inside a lion enclosure, shielded by predators who refused to stand down. Titan stepped forward. Just one step. The ground seemed to shake with it. His roar exploded across the reserve, violent, commanding, unmistakable. Not aimed at Liana, aimed at the men who had pushed her. The sound cut through every excuse, every lie, every attempt at control. Even the rangers froze, instinctively recognizing the warning. Crane stumbled backward, pale, trembling. For the first time, fear overtook authority. The power dynamic flipped in a single breath. As rangers rushed to unlock the emergency gate, Liana rose slowly to her feet, phone still recording. Titan matched her movement, staying close, his massive frame escorting her step by step toward safety. Behind her, the lions advanced just enough to keep the officers back. And in that charged, suspended moment, sirens screaming, cameras rolling, truth capturing everything, Liana realized something undeniable. The system meant to protect her had failed, but the truth hadn't, and neither had the most dangerous creatures in the enclosure. The moment Liana Brooks crossed through the emergency gate, the world she had been holding at bay finally collapsed into motion. Rangers pulled her clear and slammed the steel barrier shut behind her, sealing the enclosure as Titan released one final roar, deep, echoing, decisive. It wasn't anger, it was a verdict. Medics rushed in, checking her injuries as her hands shook uncontrollably around her phone. Her body ached, her lungs burned, but she was alive. And more importantly, the truth was intact. The footage had already begun uploading, spreading beyond the reserve's walls before anyone could stop it. What had been intended as a silent punishment was now impossible to contain. Officer Crane and the others were separated for questioning. Their stories unraveled under scrutiny, contradicted by timestamps, angles, and the undeniable reality captured on camera. Within hours, the video surged across social media, replayed in slow motion by millions who saw what Liana had experienced and what had nearly been taken from her. She didn't leave the reserve as a victim. She left as proof. News outlets debated the unbelievable behavior of the lions, replaying Titan's protective stance again and again. Experts searched for explanations, but for many watching, the meaning was painfully clear. When those sworn to protect abused their power, even nature seemed to reject the injustice. Liana spoke later that evening, her voice steady despite everything. She didn't center fear, she centered truth. She spoke about visibility, about how quickly accountability disappears when no one is watching, and how dangerous it becomes when someone refuses to look away. Inside the enclosure, Titan lay beneath the fading light, calm once more. His role finished, his message delivered. This wasn't just a story about a woman and a lion. It was a mirror held up to a system that too often decides who deserves safety and who doesn't. The question now isn't what happened that day. It's how many moments like this never get seen, and what it will take for justice to stop being an exception. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Black Community Struggles for more powerful stories about justice, truth, and our fight to be seen. And don't forget to hit the like button. Your support helps these stories reach the people who need them most.